Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's guest is Leland Beaumont. Now, Leland is an independent researcher and analyst that I have had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know, and full of wisdom from the research that he has done and made available to others. And we'll talk about that as well as how he got there. So stay tuned. We're going to have an awesome conversation. We'll be right back. Leland, it is so good to have you here. I've been looking forward to this, and I know it's going to be an amazing conversation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it as well.
So the infamous question that I ask is that, we're talking about the difference between inner and outer realities and the bridging of those, which we haven't done much of in our recent or even distant past, because those who have also been deemed crazy, weird, insane, and all those kinds of I don't know about you, so I'm going to reject you kind of statements, right?
Okay.
So how did you first get in touch with this awareness that there was more to life than what you were thinking and what was occurring around you, that there was a deeper connection that somehow made itself available to you? How'd that happen?
So I'm naturally curious, or I guess I'm naturally curious. We can argue whether it's a trait or learned. And the defining question since I was very young was sort of how does that work? And early on, um, I would take things apart at home. We had a Lionel electric train set, which was terrific. And as a
Hmm.
little kid, I had toy train and I just added a battery and a wire to see, but that wasn't enough. So there's this kind of curiosity going on. Um, in 1957, and this is relevant, in 1957, they launched the Sputnik satellite.
Mhm.
And that energized a movement towards what we now call STEM. And the manifestation of that time-wise matched up with my um, grade school, high school, and so on curriculum. So there was a lot of stuff.
Could you define what STEM is so that our
Oh
audience?
yeah, I'm sorry. It's an acronym they use now, meaning science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Great.
So there's a focus on that. That term was not popular, but basically the fact that the Russians whooped us with respect to space exploration energized a push towards math, science, education things. And a lot of innovative programs came from that, um, which I frankly I benefited from through those ages. So I'm curious. There is an emphasis on science, engineering, math, technology, and um, and I hooked onto that. Um, the rumor
How
is
old
that
were you at the time when this first began to take root?
right. So young. I can tell you that the rumor is that when I was 10 years old in fifth grade, I took my mother's washing machine apart and built a computer. I've done little to dispel that myth, but the truth is, some things came together. Her washing machine broke down, so it was there for me to take apart.
Yeah.
And by chance, and this is part of the Sputnik thing, I came across a magazine that showed a circuit diagram to build a component of a computer that's now called, I now know it's called a half adder with carry, but it's a circuit made out of two double pole, double throw relays, and it does a simple binary computation. And I just put that together with the solenoids I took out of my mother's washing machine in the science fair, and I built a gadget that had two switches and two night lights, and it could do add those two binary numbers together. I did
Mhm.
that in the fifth grade science fair.
Kind of
Um,
dancing lights, huh?
Yeah, I'm happy to report no one was electrocuted by this, um,
But
but it didn't
you
win
know, you
anything.
mentioned the Lionel train set. I had one too.
Right.
Curious kid that I was, just like you.
Yeah.
I took it to the extent where I took the leads from the transformer,
Right.
from the potentiometer,
Yeah.
and I held on to them and used my foot to turn it up to see how far I could handle it.
That's good. What did you measure the voltage?
Yeah. Well, internally, it's like, oh yeah, I can hold on to this. Oh wow, that tingles, and it's really a strange sensation because of that. The amperage, I guess, wasn't high enough to where it was that destructive. But wow, it was difficult to hang on to.
Yeah.
What a
We
strange sensation, right?
Yeah, at that time, there was available in kind of the surplus market. If you ever watched Timmy on Lassie, they dialed the phone like this.
Hmm.
Well, that was actually cranking a generator. The generator is something like 110 volts to run the ringing circuit in the phone. And that's what that was. When
Right.
they retired those phones, those generators, gadget about this big, were available. We used to, and this is, I'll use the word fun um, loosely here, but if you could sit in a circle and hold each end of that and then crank it faster and faster, and then the first person let go was the weakest link.
Right.
So these are
Right.
things. All right.
Oh yeah.
So anyhow, I've had this curiosity. Um, I've and it continued. I will reveal to you in strict confidence that I actually have a varsity letter from my high school in mathematics. We had a math team and we did very well. We had an extremely innovative math program at that time called UICSM, University of Illinois Committee on School Mathematics.
Hmm.
And what was innovative about it is we actually proved every theorem before we used it, which is actually the essence of mathematics. It's not just learning math tables and so on.
Right.
So we had that. We had an innovative physics program. Um, by chance, I got to go to George Washington University for summer classes before my senior year of high school, and I learned computer programming. And this was back in 1968. So I was actually learned
Fresh
computer
starts.
programming in high school in 1968, which kind of changed my life.
So it was called COBOL at the time. Was that
Well,
or was it
I
prior
learned
to?
Fortran. Fortran was
Fortran,
form
right. That was
translation. And what was cool is, at that time, you learn math, it's pencil and paper. I have a very nice slide rule, but it's pencil and paper.
Oh
But
yeah, there were slide rules, but no computers or no calculators or anything like that.
they weren't available to you. The electronic calculators had still didn't come up for another almost 8 or 10 years. Slide rules do multiplication and division, but they can't do addition. So you're still pencil and paper there. But anyhow, the computer became kind of a mathematical laboratory where you could actually do math on the thing quickly. Senior year of high school, I actually wrote a program that solved cubic equations using some clever stuff. So these are the things that I gravitated to. And this was fun for me. In fact, a classmate turned to me and said, "Do you do this for fun?" And I sort of think that I do. It was an area where I could explore, ask questions, do experiments, learn things, and pretty good.
That's where your curiosity came into place. I mean, because
Right,
we are naturally curious. I believe that's a natural thing that we have. We're programmed not to over time because of the outer experiences that we have and the questions we ask that we get shut down from, right?
right,
And then this curiosity, though, it allows you to have fun because that's really the essence of it. That
correct.
learning is fun because
Yeah.
you're experimenting. You don't know. So let's find out, right? And
You
there
come
really
up with a
are any
question
mistakes
and
in
you
that
say,
process.
that's interesting. And then how do you research it? And Google was not there yet. And you can poke around. We got the Encyclopedia Britannica when I was in sixth grade. You could look things up there.
Right.
You could go to the library, but you could also empirically, you could do things, experiments, and so on.
Hmm.
So that's that. So anyhow,
So you were really different than most kids your age.
yeah, but it was allowed. For
Sure.
one thing,
Probably
I
encouraged, just not so vocally, right?
Another serendipity thing here. Born in Philadelphia, but when I was 4 years old, we moved to Churchville, Pennsylvania, which is small town in Lower Bucks County. It was, after the war and it was expanding quickly. And by chance, my one next door neighbor was my fifth grade school teacher, and the other next door neighbor was a professional chemist. And the school teacher has two sons, one of which a little older than me, who is even kookier than me.
Hmm.
It was okay. There was no place to go out to. There were no bars in town or anything like this when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But we had a big backyard, and you wandered around the neighborhood. And the friends that I had were into some of this kind of stuff. Okay. One guy would take apart TVs and had a whole collection of electronic components and things and stuff going on in the basement. And my um, uh, chemist next door neighbor would give me big chemistry catalogs and all this stuff. So I was allowed to do these kinds of things. And the people who I hung out with were along those lines. And that's what I did.
Such a supportive universe, right?
Yes.
And not realizing it at the time, I'm sure,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But it
So
was,
I went to college at Lehigh University, about an hour away, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I started out as a chemistry major, but I switched quickly to electrical engineering, which was again very, very fortunate. And I did well. I'll just phrase it that way. I grooved on it. I really just, you go to class and you understand what he's saying and you're learning something that's new and interesting, and I gobbled it up.
yeah.
So I
And then
did
the what ifs come up.
the what ifs.
Yeah.
Help me with that.
Well, the what if is okay, given this, what if, because as you learn things, knowing you as I do, you extrapolate, right? You're like, okay, what can I do with this?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Where's it applicable? What can I experiment with? What can I figure out as a result?
So I'm an engineer. My degrees are in electrical engineering, and I've come up with this definition of the distinction between a scientist and an engineer. A scientist says, based on what we don't know, what more can we learn?
Hmm.
An engineer says, based on what we do know, what can we build? What problem we can solve? What can we do? So
Hmm.
that's the engineering viewpoint. You learn something new and you say, how can I apply that? What can I do with it? And so on. So that was kind of
Right.
good. So did okay at Lehigh. Another fortunate thing. Um, I was hired by Bell Laboratories. And um,
That's telling.
that's and I took the job. And I took the job. So growing up, that was like um, an unattainable aspiration. I mean, you heard about Bell Laboratories, they were such a legend at that time. This is
Sure.
going back into the 60s and so on. I started
Right.
working in 72, going back to that time. And why would you interview me? Why would you offer me the job? And then the building I worked in is an architectural landmark designed by I'll get the name wrong, Erno Saarinen. And you see it and it's just magic. One of the
Hmm.
people who interviewed me, his name's Gordon Heffron, had behind him in the office a personally autographed photograph. It's the one you've seen of Buzz Aldrin on the moon taking the picture of the flag. So this was personally autographed to Gordon Heffron by Neil Armstrong.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
So
I got to
the
share
other
this because this you just prompted a wonderful memory of mine meeting Edgar Mitchell. Six
remind me, the
the astronaut, Edgar Mitchell. He was the sixth
okay,
man on the moon. And
okay,
I met him in 97. We became fast friends, and I was running an event called the Prophets Conference. We had 30 speakers, and I don't know, 5,000 people came through on the weekend. But I had the opportunity being the event manager that I could go anywhere, do anything, and Edgar was one of the people that I wanted to
right,
meet. We became fast friends, and over the conversations that we had over the weekend, he finally says to me, building the trust, he says, I want to tell you something, but you got to promise not to tell anybody till after I'm dead. And
Okay.
I was shocked at that, humbled by the trust that he placed in me. And he says to me, you know, as soon as we left the command module on the way down, because he was the pilot of the lunar excursion
Okay.
module.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's
And
tricky.
the lunar excursion model only had two triangular shaped windows in it.
Yeah.
And I'd done my research on the Gemini and Apollo programs when I was in junior high and I wrote a paper about it. So um, he says there was this metallic silver cylinder spiraling around the LEM all the way down to the surface of the moon. And
Hmm.
I couldn't tell the exact size because there was really no perspective. I couldn't tell if there was one or several because I only had that triangular window. And I couldn't really tell the size or whether it was piloted on board or from the surface. What I did know is that it was nothing from Earth.
Hmm.
So later, about no, almost 10 years later, I heard in a conversation at a ufology event that Buzz and Neil both had seen similar things on their
Hmm.
excursion and, of course, couldn't report about it.
Yeah.
Now, not that they saw the spiraling around, but there was a
Yeah.
platform with these objects standing upright on them. So just beyond the dark side of the moon. So here's this awareness now that, oh gosh, we're there are others there. How long have they been there? Have they been watching? Have they been influencing? How might they do that? And, just all of this slew of curious questions
Right.
come from that. So anyway, that was the Neil story that prompted. So please pick up from there and
Okay.
how did your interview go?
I got the job.
Obviously.
So I got the job. So it was so that was good. And my I'm going to fast forward through this, but I started work there in December 72, and in June of 2001, June of 2001, I was 49 years old, and the internet bubble was crashing, and Lucent Technologies, which is the portion that I had moved to at that time,
Hmm.
was under financial pressure. And they looked at the books and they said, we have been conscientious in maintaining the pension fund all this time, and we're in crash crunch now. So they offered a number of people a very generous offer. They
Golden parachute,
basically,
right?
yeah, they basically offered me half salary for the rest of my life if I would retire in July of 2001. So that's a nice thing.
Yeah.
So I'm here on behalf of the Bell system.
Let's ring it, shall
That's
we?
right. Okay, I don't have a bell. Da, 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 da. So that was first off, it was unexpected. Okay. In June, they said if you retire in July, this is the deal. And I was still busy at work uh, and so on. But it was financially, it would be crazy to pass it up. And
Mhm. Oh,
I'd
sure.
done enough.
Now, so
So
was this the step or the door that opened for you to do the wisdom research? Is that how this began taking it? Because you've done a ton of stuff on Wiki
yeah,
University,
right.
Wikiversity, I guess it.
Wikiversity, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So what happened is that I I had worked for money since then. Did some consulting work, um, co-authored a book, and wrote some others. But here's the kind of the key thing is that I realized I said I've got some years ahead of me. I've got the analytical skills that I have, and so on. So can I use problem-solving skills that I have to solve a problem bigger than the next iPhone? Okay, more impact on that.
sure.
So by chance, my I have a sister 3 years older who's a sociologist named Donna. I called her up. I said, Donna, in physics, if you learn Newton's laws of physics, 3 or 4 equations, you can develop a whole bunch of physics and engineering and everything else. What's the equivalent of that in human relations, social science, and so on? So she broke up laughing and she says, not only am I not going to answer that question, but you can't even ask that question in social science. You know
Well, that
nothing
is
about
such a
social science.
profound question, though,
You
right?
can ask that, yeah. So that got me going.
No doubt.
So I learned at the work of a guy named Paul Ekman. And Paul Ekman is a researcher of emotions. And the research question he started with about 60 or so years ago. At that time, within psychology was the behavioralist, the Skinner and all of that. All behavior is learned. So he says, well, if all behavior is learned, and you've got a society that's been isolated away from Western culture, they would have learned different emotions than we have. So it would be fun to go to an isolated culture and learn what emotions they have. So he traveled to, I think it was New Guinea, and he did his experiments, and he found out that they have the same damn emotions we have, okay? He has studied in depth what he calls the 7 basic emotions. Let me see if I can get them. Anger, fear, surprise, joy, sadness, disgust, and contempt, I think are the 7 that he lists. So here it is. I can count to 7. 7 emotions are human universals, and emotions are important. They really are important. The purpose
That's
of
how
an
we make all our
emotion,
choices, right? It's what resonates and what doesn't resonate. And so we're applied physics already, not really recognizing that. And with the quantum discoveries, wow,
you
gosh,
know,
everything's vibrations, right?
so an emotion, the purpose of an emotion is to interrupt what you're doing and alert you to the most important things that are happening
Mm.
around you, right? So in that sense, here it is. I can count to 7, and they're very important and they're universal. So that gave
Say
me a
that
start.
again. That's a I hadn't heard it stated that way. Then that's profound.
The purpose of an emotion is to interrupt you and alert you to what's the most important thing going on at that moment.
Let's let that set into the audience for just it is for me, and it makes sense. It kind of resonates because that is the awareness
Mhm.
of that moment. And depending, of course, our preference is probably joy, but the others seem to
So
enter.
if you're a computer scientist, they're analogous to the interrupt routines that goes on in a microprocessor. It says,
Sure.
okay, we're gonna, but we're interrupting here. Okay. So that got me going. So I spent a couple of years, and it's still out there, developing a website called emotionalcompetency.com. And in it, I list, I think, 18 different emotions. I actually have a state change diagram of the emotion of anger out there, which is something you'll only get from an engineer, but it's kind of cool. And it was important to me. Um, I'm an introvert, so I'll confess to that. And I'm not emotionally aware, okay? My wife is emotionally talented, but I'm kind of emotionally oblivious, and I was confused by this and everything else. So the fact that I could attack these, um, you know, emotions are sometimes contrasted with rationality, but the
Oh,
fact that
right. And the rationality comes from a masculine perspective, where the emotion comes from a feminine perspective. Would you agree with that?
that's classically the way they're thought about. And by the way, I prefer to use yin and yang rather than masculine, feminine,
Okay.
but we'll go
Right.
on to
Yeah,
that.
I'm good with that.
But I believe there's a book called Passion and Reason that got me started on this. And he talks about the story behind every emotion.
Hmm.
And for example, the story behind anger is it's an urgent plea um, for action um, urgent plea for justice and action. So the motivating factor for anger is your perception of an injustice where somebody is blameworthy. So the fact that there's kind of a story behind it, a logic behind it, a reason behind it appeals to my rational way of thinking.
Hmm.
And the fact that I can now, using that kind of rational map, when I see people get angry or when I'm getting angry, I can kind of decompose it. And the
Gives
wiki,
you the ability to step back and observe and make better choices.
correct, correct, correct. And the Wikiversity course I wrote relevant to that is called Resolving Anger. And that's not managing anger or suppressing it or anything like that. It's resolving it, which
Hmm.
is saying, okay, this is anger. Why am I feeling anger? The basis of anger is injustice. What is the injustice that I see? And then you begin to say, is that real or imagined? What's my sense of justice? Who do I blame and why? And all of that.
Hmm.
So it's not just that it's being oppressed or anything like that. You're actually getting to the root of it. And then you're asking, what can I change and not change and so on.
This seems like it would really fit in. One of the other hats I wear is operations director for a global peace movement called Live and Let Live.
Okay.
Of course, it's in the name, right? What a sticky one it is. There are two principles that we offer, and that is a legal and a moral.
Hmm.
The moral principle is be an excellent human. So there's an aspirational list of values that we aspire to live. And then don't aggress is the legal principle, which is let live, which means
Right.
I can do whatever I want as long as it's peaceful, so can you.
Right.
In order to move that forward, we have to further define, as the legal principle, don't aggress. Well, what is aggression?
Right.
And so we define what that is across the spectrum of the only thing that we can, and that's ownership, whether it's
Okay.
person, property, time, money, those kinds of things, and what aggression is really towards that, which when that principle is violated, that produces the anger because there's injustice. Now, what do we do
Correct.
about that?
Correct. Correct. But no one has a good definition of justice
Right. Yet,
yet. We're
because we haven't
working
dealt
on
with the emotions behind it. This
it.
is, as we're talking, the inner and the outer, the emotions we hold inside, and we don't necessarily let them spill out, like you were just saying. You use your rational mind, you step back, you look, you make a better choice as to how to respond to the situation instead of react to it emotionally.
Right.
So that's part of where this, okay, what is justice and how do we implement that? And if things don't violate the legal principle and they're still morally reprehensible, what do you do? Because
You
that's
align legal justice with moral justice,
right.
which is hard. So anyhow, I worked for 2 or 3 years creating a website called emotionalcompetency.com. Um, it has the stories of about 18 emotions out there. I learned an awful lot doing it. And from time to time, I would get gratifying emails from people saying, um, this really helped. And of course, at the labs, a joke about Bell Laboratories. How do you tell the extroverts from the introverts at Bell Laboratories?
Um, the discoveries are talked about instead of withheld.
Oh, there you go. No, the extroverts look down at your shoes instead of theirs during
Ah,
the conversation. So the joke is relevant to emotional competency because this is the crowd I hung out with. So, engineers, accountants, maybe lawyers, and so on don't have this emotional competency. They don't have this emotional understanding. And some of the material I put out there, I think, because it's written from the point of view of somebody who had to learn it as opposed to like my wife is talented with it, is that,
exactly. And this, as you're now revealing, this is a process that happens from the learning, the curiosity, the discovery in life of, okay, this feels good, or okay, this doesn't feel so good. What do I
yeah,
do about it?
yeah, what's going on here,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So anyhow,
You got to
it's
figure out
out
what's going
there.
on before you can do anything about it,
Yeah,
right?
it's out there, and I still think this is true, but I think this is a essential life skill that simply is not taught.
Hmm.
And the idea that some sort of age-appropriate curriculum on this could be developed and so on, I think is an important.
And what do you think about holistic education? By that, I mean body, mind, spirit, planet, cosmos relationship. Because as we get older, we discover those relationships. So
Right.
why don't we then use the wisdom of that and say, oh, okay, maybe we ought to teach our children this?
So I work with a an educator who lives in Australia, who I think she started calling it Wisdom Lab. She saw the work, the my Living Wisely wisdom work on the internet. I've Zoomed with her many times since then, and she's kind of putting out a proposal to her colleagues, saying, "How can we get this going in grade school kind of settings?" So I'd like to see something like that happen. So
Well,
those
and they
ideas
did.
are
I researched, I taught high school for a number of years and
okay.
included my series 2002, 2003 year and was finishing my master's in organizational management at the time. So I wrote a business plan with what was missing from the school system. And I taught it at inner city high schools, charter schools, and had full charge of curriculum at two different charter schools. One of them I built multiple intelligence learning centers in. And then the third was at the, not third, but I think fifth environment was at a residential treatment center. And so I had all of this experience and okay, what do I do with this? And I looked at what was missing and tried to, not tried, I asked the questions, how can I, what can I offer that would fill these gaps? And I came up with holistic education. And then doing my research, I found out that it was actually started in Australia.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so they may be ahead of us.
That actually, because this was you were talking about 2001, I'm guessing, and so this was that 2002, 2003, where the programs were actually being instituted, which was phenomenal. I was like, okay, this is great. Why aren't we doing it over here? Well, we're still producing factory workers. That's why.
Yeah, yep. So that's that. So anyhow, from the emotional competency work, and again, the page is still out there, although I'm transferring them to Wikiversity. We'll get to that in a minute. I met an interesting guy named Copthorne McDonald, lived in Canada, and by chance, he was a retired electrical engineer who had turned his attention to wisdom. And he had a website he still called Wisdom Page, which was very popular. And he was very kind in answering my emails and these sorts of things. And he had I keep saying had, unfortunately, he died about 10 years ago. And the Wisdom Page is out there. I'm the custodian of the page, which means I pay the internet bill for it every year,
Right.
but I'm not moving it forward. But anyhow, he has a board of directors, and one of those people was a guy named Nicholas Maxwell. So Nicholas Maxwell is a professor emeritus of philosophy from UCL, University College London, and about 40 or 50 years ago, he said, the world's problem, he says, I know the cause of the world's problems. The cause of the world's problem is that academia is knowledge focused and they should be wisdom focused. Actually, he says knowledge inquiry instead of wisdom inquiry. So by
And how do you get
academia, he meant
wisdom comes through experience, right?
um, it can. Sometimes people avoid it through experience, but it can.
Right.
I have a
Well, the
phrase
ultimate proof is the experience of it, right?
I have a phrase, I said, wisdom cannot be taught, but it can be learned. Okay.
Hmm.
So I have that out there, and experience helps, especially if you're curious and learning and growth mindset and all that kind of stuff. So, anyhow, Nicholas Maxwell, um, okay, so says we need to convert the colleges and universities from knowledge inquiry, asking the question of what is, to wisdom inquiry, what ought to be. So his idea was, and he has a mailing list of maybe a couple hundred like philosophy professors. He says, go into your staff meetings and make this happen. Well, no, for so many reasons. But at that time, I discovered Wikiversity. Now, everybody knows Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia is a platform that invites volunteer editors to create encyclopedia pages. Wikiversity is a sister project. In fact, on every Wikipedia page, you'll see a link to it over the side. It's a sister project. Wikiversity, Wiki University, a platform that invites volunteer editors to create learning resources, meaning course materials.
Hmm.
So I said, this is it. I can create a wisdom-based curriculum, greenfield, ground up. I don't have to convince any committees or curriculum people or anything like that. I'm just going to go in and do this. And I got that insight it's almost 14 years ago now that I got that
Well,
insight.
isn't it interesting how many of these things, because of the work that we do, we often find ourselves in silos, right? And a lot of that times it happens because we think we need to have or find the financial and or resource oriented um, materials to help
Right,
us move forward, right?
right,
We're stuck in that economic model rather than finding things that through the curiosity of, oh, maybe, are these things available? Can I
right,
do this? And what might be there that allows me to, or even encourages me to, which
right.
is what the whole wiki framework does.
Yeah.
Now, how do you see that affecting this? We were talking earlier about the financial shift that's probably in process right now, and whether it converts to a microeconomy because of the micro purchases that are done online and those kinds of things, or is it going to come to a resource-based economy? What do you see in that, or do you? And is that a fair question to ask?
So it's a fair question. I can't give a can't give a short authoritative answer, at least, or even a long authoritative one. But here's one thing. I wrote an article, it's on Substack, and it's called The Future of Education is Learning. And what I'm saying is that information is freely available now. Okay. There are 6 million web pages on Wikipedia. Okay. There's only 30,000, but that's not bad on Wikiversity, and they're freely available. So if you want to learn, this stuff is out there. So why is it that today people are still clamoring to spend uh, tens of thousands of dollars to go into Harvard, and they're ignoring freely available stuff that's
Hmm.
there? And I think the answer is the certificate. Okay. So in that little article that I wrote, I mentioned, could we get a certification um, schemes in place? So you might go to freely available educational resources, study some topic, and then there might be an agency that you go to give you the
There's got to be an
certificate.
LMS that eventually, learning management system, for those that don't understand LMS, which is a system that offers curriculum and then is capable of quizzing and or testing and providing
Correct.
certificates.
Yeah, that sort of thing, that sort of thing. And a simple model for it is the AP exams, right? In high school, you
Yeah.
can take AP Advanced Placement um, uh, chemistry, I guess, and then you can take a test and get college credit for it. That sort
Mhm.
of thing could be expanded. So that's a model where the burden for learning is on the student rather than teacher. Choose your subjects, move around, and if you need a certificate to demonstrate, um, to validate that,
There's another one too, the college level examination program,
okay,
right? It's similar.
doctor, okay,
Only it's after the AP. It's in between AP and um, college entrance. And so
okay,
I took those tests and tested out 5 quarters going in. So,
good, yeah.
but so what, right? It's
And, and,
because I was curious enough and I had the intelligence. I love taking tests. But for some reason, it was just a challenge, and for some reason, I could query something beyond me, and the answers would come. I never understood exactly why early on, but I did after the experience I had in college that we spoke
right.
about earlier. So, how did that, as you were developing this, and was there any um, resolve or potential path that you were able to see that could offer um, en masse this adjustment in the educational system that we sorely need?
Um, competing on price hasn't worked. Okay. The materials on Wikiversity are freely available. Okay. Now, Wikiversity itself is still early in its formation. Like I mentioned, Wikipedia has 6 million pages out there, but Wikiversity only has 30,000.
30,000. Yeah.
If anybody here wants to develop a course, I wrote the course on how to develop the courses. So those things are out there.
What a
I think,
resource you are.
what can I say? So I think a couple things. First off, I don't think universities are going away. I think that what might happen is that the higher end universities will stop teaching freshman calculus. Okay, expect that the kids come in knowing freshman calculus,
Hmm.
and what you can become is more of a place for dialogue and discovery and higher level learning and those kind of things. So I kind of see that
Well, yeah,
taking.
well, it makes sense to flip it, right? We're used to 250 seat auditoriums with an instructor for lectures.
Right.
Well, what kind of dialogue does that create?
Terrible. I I I I was very lucky again. I tested out of freshman calculus, so I took calculus 2 when all the freshmen were taking calculus 1, and
Mhm.
they were in the auditorium and I was in the little classroom. But in graduate school, I went to Purdue, and I happened to walk by an
Oh, that's
undergraduate.
right close to where I grew up.
You go.
Yeah, I grew up over next to Muncie.
Okay, Indiana, same state. Interesting.
Oh,
So I
Purdue,
walked.
had uh, of course Purdue. I mean, gosh, starts with an L. I was trying to think of the town that it's in. Gosh, I've been away too long.
Purdue's in West
Engineering school,
Lafayette.
great engineering school though.
Yeah, Purdue's in West Lafayette, Indiana.
Yeah,
Uh,
what Lafayette, that was it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So twice I went to a football game there. Anyhow,
Hmm.
I happened to walk past the undergraduate Calculus 1 class, and it was in a huge auditorium, every seat full, and it was overflowing. There were students in the hallway outside listening through the doorway to hear the professor speak. This is not the way. This is not the way. Okay, but there is a role for it. I was given a study it yourself calculus test in the summer before senior year of high school, and I didn't get through it. I just needed the discipline of the classroom and the tests and the homework and all of that to get through it. So there are motivational elements. There's elements of
Because
contact or
education
contact.
is self-initiating, right?
Yeah,
You've got to want it to go find it and then get it.
yeah,
Whereas, today a lot of these lectures would do well just to be a webinar or something like
yeah.
that you could do as a um,
Well,
precog.
The Khan Academy has done a whole lot with that, and the Khan Academy talks about inverting the classroom, where the homework assignment is to watch the lectures of the Khan Academy, and then the classroom time is spent with the teacher answering questions going around. What did you not understand, and so on. So there's been some success with that. So I
Yeah,
think
the
these things can
Institute of
happen.
there was another Institute of Transformational Leadership, Fyodor Ovchinnikov, what actually my first guest on One World in a New World, did
Okay.
a series with several people, Nora Bateson, Daniel Wall, Manzik Akar, Anthony Upward, and Robert Gilman, who's known as the Planetary Midwife. Uh,
Okay.
you might be familiar with. But yeah, that was a super series that did the homework, right? Watched the lectures, material, and then came for discourse. And
Yeah.
it was far more valuable.
Yeah. So those kind of transformations, there's stuff poking away at it now. We'll see what happens. Um, so that's that. And Wikiversity, like I said, there's some valuable stuff out there, but it's not as far along. It is, I asked why. Um, it's kind of hard to develop a course.
I understand from being a teacher myself and having to create curriculum. Yeah, it is. And you've got to figure out, okay, what's the prereqs? What do you need to know?
Hmm.
where am I going to take them? What do I want them to end up
Right.
with? And
Yeah.
then how do I get there? And then how do you evaluate that you got
Yeah.
there?
And then the other thing is that it takes a commitment to go through the course and study it in
Oh,
some.
sure, sure.
People have said they're
So
too complex, but I don't know. I think you got to get to it. So
step,
these things,
stepping out of the coursework and the complexity for a moment,
right,
how do you see, you're still in this wisdom seeking. How
right.
do you see what's happening on the planet, the results of the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration, and now groups and organizations forming as a result of that, people popping up out of nowhere? How do you see that evolving into some kind of, let's say, salient process that allows us to begin to learn how to work together better on a global
Right.
scale as a village rather than a bunch of nationalists?
So question here of time frames. I have a course. So I'm going to begin every answer with I have a course.
Right,
I
right,
have a
right.
course. I have a course called Envisioning the Future.
Of course.
And it lays some groundwork, but it invites you to write an essay of the future as you would like to see it. Maybe the first time I did it, I picked 50 years from now, and so on. And the one that I wrote most recently is called Toward Compassion. And it basically says that if we could get on this compassion, if we just understood the value of compassion, and if we just treated other people with compassion, good things could happen. And
Absolutely. And that
there's a
would eliminate four of those seven emotions because you don't
right, yeah,
experience them when you're compassionate.
yeah, yeah. So that's a very, very powerful opportunity. Um, and sometimes I think that will happen, and sometimes I think that it won't. Now, there's
Depends on the day, right?
yeah, so there's a lot of transformations that have to take place. But one of them, and again, I have a Substack article on this called Who Owns the Productivity Dividend? Okay. A
Hmm.
lot of the fuss you hear around AI is that it will take your jobs. And it's getting traction now because the jobs they mean are white collar jobs, not blue collar jobs, right? It'll take your jobs. But here's the idea of the productivity dividend. And I'll give you a link to the article, but I can do it pretty quickly. Hans Schumacher owns a shoe factory. It's been in the family for many years. And right now he uses a Mach 2 shoe machine that can create 10,000 shoes using 10 workers in one day. Okay. The old machine, 10,000 shoes, 10 workers per day. That machine is end of its life cycle. He's replacing it with the Mark V shoe machine. And the Mark V shoe machine is twice as productive. He can either create 20,000 shoes with the 10 workers he has, or he can do 10,000 shoes, the same number he does now, with 5 workers. What does he do?
Hmm. Good question. What will the market bear? Is there a demand?
Same number of feet.
Well, you'd have to look at the trend line as to what his sales were doing, right? Are you going up or down and or flat? Um, and if so, how else, what other additional marketing could be done to expand?
So I have caught you in a growth paradigm. Okay. So I'll tell you what he does.
Okay.
He calls the people together and they talk about the different options. And what he comes out with is if you voluntarily leave, I will give you 40%,
Oh, here
40%.
we go. Your scenario, right? Bell ads.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah, mine was 50. It was 40%. Yeah. If
Yeah.
you voluntarily leave, I will give you 40% of what I've been paying you for a long period of time. And half the people leave. So he doesn't have to expand the market because the market was always people have more shoes than they need anyway. All right. You can't put expanding the market is maybe not the thing to do. Okay.
I have discussions
the
with my wife about that a lot.
happy
And then
wife,
she
happy
accuses
life.
me of trying to catch up.
Happy wife, happy life. That's the
Yeah,
solution.
exactly.
Okay. So
And how many of us never get that?
get that, right? What is it? Something like half the population is divorced. So that'll give you an answer.
Hmm.
So, so Hans's solution, I'm going to share the productivity. Okay. The people most affected by an increased productivity are the people who lose their jobs. Okay. Why shouldn't they share in the productivity dividend? Okay.
Absolutely. They help
There
get
you
it
go.
there.
Yeah. So that's the idea. The article carries a little bit further and so on. But I think that shift in mindset, which is I'm not going to hoard the productivity dividend and just leave these people out in the cold. I
So,
can share it with them. I can share it with them and still do better because he gets the 60%. They get the
so
40.
here comes what I like to call the new agenda.
Okay.
People and planet over profit, where the old agenda has been profit over people and planet. So the old agenda would have said, okay, 5 workers gone, we'll absorb the profit, we'll do more.
Right.
Where the new way is, oh, wow, you guys have been helpful. We make the same profit. We don't need anything else because we're already doing okay. So we're going to share it with you
Right.
and help take care of you so that that compassion and goodwill is brought forth.
Correct. Correct. And this needs transformations all over the place. Needs people to live wisely, think more clearly, embrace compassion and generosity. But it's going to need a transformation of our financial systems, um, our belief systems, and many other things.
Sure. Well, aren't we due for reformation of how we and where we put our attention,
Hmm.
intention, and interaction,
Correct.
which those three components are what create our reality? What's our focus? Are we
Correct.
focusing on the um, what's oh, the less than the because our society is based on not having enough, right?
Right. Scarcity.
Scarcity, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. I've tried to eliminate from my vocabulary and it wouldn't come. So maybe I'm being somewhat effective. So in the thrivability that we have as humanity, there are many studies and research that shows we don't need to depopulate. We just need to figure out how to reorganize because we've got the land, we've got the produce, we've got the food, we've got everything, the distribution systems. They just aren't working at peak. They're working in a subservient way to their masters, which is the profit over people and planet.
Right.
Now,
Right.
switching that, how do you see that evolving, and what are some of the things that you might see or already do as a result of this shift?
Right. So a couple things. I wrote an essay called Coping with Abundance. I wrote it some time ago, but it basically says that um, the assumption of scarcity is at the basis for current economic theory. But I think that we've reached a level of productivity now where we can think in terms of abundance rather than scarcity. So that's the
Right,
idea of
right.
coping with abundance. Um, so that's one
Well, and
thing
how
that
many talking about the wisdom? I got to interrupt with it for just a
yeah.
minute. Pardon me. We're taught in all of the ancient texts and spiritual scriptural, our lives are to be abundant and to have life more abundantly. And
Mhm.
this is what we're designed for.
Right.
How have
So
we been missing our design so much?
yeah. I have a course called What Matters, and one of my phrases is
You got an answer for everything in a course or a Substack, Leland. This is great.
I've
Lots of thought have got
I got
answered.
time.
I mean, you've had
This is what I
23
do.
years to put all this together.
Yeah. So focus on what matters. Um, uh, Cope with abundance, um, cherish wisdom, compassion, all these things. But um, I think that we need to, um, and maybe just because this is the paper I worked on this week, but the financial system needs a big overhaul. Okay. So the paper I wrote, it has kind of three sections. The first part is in praise of capitalism, because unless you praise capitalism, you're going to lose half the audience. And then the second phrase, part of it is existing problems. And there's a long list of existing problems. One of them is it doesn't capture the externalities. Another one is the inequalities that come up, the fact that we don't pay for eco services, all that kind of stuff. And then
Mhm.
the last one is what I call solution approaches. And this is where some of the wild thinking is out there. But there's a book called Sacred Economics written by Charles Eisenstein, which does some bold thinking in this direction. So that's one idea. There's something called donut economics. There's something called circular economy. There's something called steady state economy. So there's a lot of ideas out there.
Another one, even divine economy.
Okay, don't know that one, but let me look into that. So the ideas are there. The question is, how do you do the transformation? And um,
And
so
do it in such a way that it doesn't wreck things in the process.
correct, yeah, and it's tricky.
Yeah.
But I have a course called Evolving Governments, and uh, let's see if we have it here. There we go. So this is not something that's easy to do, um, but I think that the changes at this level will require changes in the governments and the way they run and everything else.
Mhm.
You and I are thinking about these things and sharing ideas and building a movement, maybe, and so on, but stuff has to change.
Yep.
So, so the
And we've got
single
to provide ways for it to that um, make sense, right? There's a whole movement of there's the, sense making,
right.
right? So what does that mean, right? That applies back into this native system we have within us and the indigenous side of things, philosophy, the three brains, right? The gut, the heart, and the head. And, the science is proving now the gut has more neurosensors than the brain. So why is that? Why would it be designed that way? Well, maybe that's because we have that intuitive gut feeling that we're supposed to, right? And then you distill it in the heart. It's like, okay, does this feel good or not? The Taoist kind of thing. Is it desirable or undesirable? Then you can take that information and make better choices with it with the third brain, which is your head.
So let me get very practical now for a minute, because you're right with all of that, but how's it going to change?
Hmm.
I now believe the most effective next step that we can take in the United States is to advocate for something called Final Five voting. Okay, this may sound mundane, and who needs politics and da 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 da.
Sounds like the Sweet 16 in college basketball, right?
Okay, it's not. Final Five voting, this is
I know.
advocated. There's a book called The Politics Industry, co-authored by Catherine Gill and Michael Porter, where they lay all this stuff out. She's a strong advocate for it. The plan is very simple. The goal is to um, reduce political polarization that has us basically polarized at this point, and to align government action more nearly with the will of the people. And the simple plan, I mean, the simple mechanism is you begin with an open primary, sometimes called a jungle primary, where any candidate runs regardless of party, and there's only one primary, and every person votes in that primary. You get one vote for one candidate. The top five of those that come out go into a general election, which is done with ranked choice voting, often called instant runoff voting. So I have not done it justice. It's there's a lot of thought behind this, and here's the thing: it's getting traction. Okay.
Well, we've
Um,
seen, we've gone so tired of the two-party
yeah,
system. It's broken badly.
yeah.
Everybody sees it. And so this essentially, if I'm hearing you correctly, would create a no-party system, or it still could have parties.
Or you could call it multi-party,
Yeah.
multi-party. Okay. So it solves the problem of the third party. The third parties are often seen as spoilers, but here it's not that way. So it will open all that up. The good news is that voting rules are local. Okay. So this change can be done incrementally in your town or in your state and so on. It's already in place in Maine and Alaska, believe it or not, because Alaska is such a progressive state.
Mhm.
Um,
I've thought about this a little bit and shared it with you in that there's ways to create parties in states, and there's pretty easy methods actually that are listed on most of the states' government sites as to how to create a party, what's necessary
right,
in order to do that, the number of signatures that are necessary, how they're filed, all the legal details that need to be in place. So part of what I did was create a website. This was back in 2012, I think, independencearizona.com. So it offers this simple click, download, sign, gather process to create a party. So if these kinds of things, most people, it's like, oh, create a party. How do we do that? And they seem to lock up in thinking it's going to be too complex. When, as you and I both know, when you start looking into the depths of how to do these things, most of them are pretty simple. What the complexity happens after the creation, right? But there's certain guidelines to follow in order to do it, and they're not that difficult.
right. And what I recommend is please let's get final five voting in place before you invent a new party because of the effect with right now with the two-party system, the third parties generally act as spoilers, and that's not the way to go. I just
Sure,
shared there a link
sure.
to
And
the text.
that is a real issue with that,
Yeah,
and we've noticed how valid candidates have always, even if their value, they still take away votes from others,
yeah.
and so there's this infighting that takes place, and
The final five voting structure eliminates all of that. They will have the positive effect that they want to have without being spoilers, and it can be a good thing. So that's a very kind of tactical or practical thing that we can do to move in the right direction. And that's kind of the starting point here.
hmm,
The other thing is that if the idea in the who owns the productivity dividend, if that idea happens, there will be more people that have the kind of leisure time like I have, where um, they have the time and the financial resources that they can spend the time to think longer term, and those things will happen. So I
and they
believe
are obviously. You and I are talking about it. You've been, you spent the last 23 years doing this thing, and I'm sure there's others like you. I just haven't found them yet.
there are bold thinkers out there. There definitely are.
Well, yeah, and it's the advantage um, that we don't always think about when you're younger is the wisdom that our elders carry, especially those that have continued their professional and personal growth after serving a company or even in process of.
Right. Yeah, what can I do with that? So that's a good
Right.
thing. So so those are transformations that have to happen kind of globally. What a person can do individually, however, at almost any stage of their life is simply make the decision, I want to live wisely. I want to live wisely. Okay. And if you make that decision, I put together the Wise Living Toolkit. Okay. I just sent you a link to it
What
there.
planet did you get delivered from? Because these things are so needed, so wonderful in the expression. And I've read much of your material. You're so eloquent and definitive in creating the resonance within it as one reads, right? Because you can feel the tone, the purpose, the bringing together of things in your work that you don't find a whole lot elsewhere. And so I
Mhm.
thank you for that. Uh,
Thank you for those compliments. I really, really appreciate it because I do. The
well,
way,
that's one of the reasons I asked you to be on the advisory board for Planetary
all
Citizen.
right. Well,
And
thank you for that.
you know,
So the
this
wise,
is a necessary piece.
yeah, so the Wise Living Toolkit is out there. I just sent you the link, and it goes through 20 practices. Um, the first one is take care. That's what your mother told you to do. Okay, eat a
Oh,
good
I'd
breakfast.
rather give it than take it. I'm not a taker.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, okay. Give care.
No,
Give.
I flip that because our tendency with to tell people is take care, and I'm like, okay.
Oh, I
It's
may have to
one way
change
of
that.
shifting mindsets in a moment.
Yeah. So there's that. The other one is the next step is called uphold the four agreements. Do you know the four agreements? They're very powerful. Um, be impeccable with your word. Don't make assumptions. Do your best, and it's not about you.
Right.
And
Another God.
they're simply stated. And if you can get through the day holding one of them, you're good. If you can get through the day holding four of them, um, give me a call. You're pretty spectacular. But that is, I memorized them. It's four sentences, and if you can do that, that'll make a difference. And the list goes on from there. There's about 20 things
Yeah.
listed. So these are things people can do individually. Um, Related to that, um, is the idea of a wisdom playground. How about this? A wisdom playground. Did I show this one to you? Let me get this here.
But this, you mentioned that I'm thinking about, with what I did with Citizen and the chat for Planetary Citizens and compiling all the ancient spiritual books in one location to query. What, as you were mentioning the different authors and the books and the areas and things like that, it seems like a no-brainer to actually extend that work into the sector of society and those who have developed solutions and make their books available for query in them.
Right.
Then that's, a whole process. But wow, it sounds like a no-brainer, right? Now I just got to go out and do it.
So I got the idea of the wisdom playground sometime this summer. And I wrote it up. I sent you the link there. And I said, well, where is this? And the first idea I had was the thing called the Esalen Institute. Do you know the Esalen Institute?
Yep.
I said, well,
Very
that's
early
nice.
where the um, est started.
Yeah, there's that and all that. I said, well, that's nice, but that's kind of elite and maybe a little ahead of maybe where I am, and maybe people can't have access to it. So then I came down with, I said, I got to make this more accessible. So then I wrote up the Wisdom Playground rules. So I have the 20 Wisdom Playground rules, but I'm going to make it even simpler. The essence of a Wisdom Playground is skillful dialogue on an important topic.
Hmm.
That's
Very
it. That's it. Can you learn the dialogue? I'm working on it. Are there important topics? I can send you a list. Okay. But
And you
that's
will in the future. And for now, we're kind of, we could go on forever about this,
yeah,
Leland, and I'm really enjoying this. However, we've gone over our normal time, which is
okay. Sorry.
not surprising. Don't be sorry. Uh, be Leland, because I love
All
you.
right.
You're
All
one
right.
of
Thank
the
you.
rare gems in this world that I hope to be able to expose more.
Thank
Um,
you.
so I really appreciate your time. You kind of anticipated the questions I was going to ask as far as, what can people do individually? You answered them ahead of time. So and example of the congruence of the conversation and the flow and the anticipation of what's to come and how you answered it. So this is evidence of your own natural sense of what's to come. I just want to offer that and
Thanks.
reflection from me
All right.
as to how I see that. So I really appreciate that and appreciate your time and energy and wisdom sharing here.
Thank you very much. I had a blast. I love your questions. I love your attention. I love your insights. And hopefully this will be beneficial. Okay. Thank you so much.
Absolutely will, and thank you.
Okay.
And namaste and in la catch. And thank you for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World, and a definitely apocalyptic chat that you can take into your own life and make things better by seeking the wisdom to live by.